Is that the philosophy of freedom?
Yeah.
What are you revisiting?
Can I read it?
Yeah.
So this is in the addendum. The 1918 edition at the end of Are There Limits to Knowledge? That chapter, where he's talking about percepts. He's talking about percepts everywhere. That's chapter 7. He says, "It is to be remembered too that the idea of percept developed in this book is not to be confused with the idea of external sense percept, which is but a special instance of it. The reader will gather from what has gone before, but even more from what will follow, that percept is taken here to be everything that approaches man through the senses or through the spirit, before it has been grasped by the actively elaborated concept. Senses, as we ordinarily understand the term, are not necessary in order to have percepts in soul or spirit experience. It might be said that this extension of our ordinary usage is not permissible, but such extension is absolutely necessary if we are not to be prevented by the current sense of a word from enlarging our knowledge in certain fields. Anyone who uses perception to mean only sense perception will never arrive at a concept fit for the purposes of knowledge, even knowledge of this same sense perception. One must sometimes enlarge a concept in order that it may get its appropriate meaning in a narrower field."
Yeah. Definitely has relevance to ask what we might mean by observation of the heavens.
Yeah.
Beyond just what can be measured with the eyes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the intellectual perception.
Mm-hmm. And the bodily perception, the perception with the other organs of our bodies, the heart, the liver, the lungs. These are also modes of perception, right? Ways of being in resonance with the cosmic environment.
Yeah, I guess you could say that there are different aspects of our being that have correspondences with other processes in the cosmos. That if we tune into that organ, I guess, we can perceive what it's connected with, what activity it's connected with. I think that's the idea. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, trying to define a word like perception is a fool's errand, but we could characterize it as it seems to have more of a receptive quality to it than, say, conception.
Yeah, I think, Steiner and Barfield and Coleridge, it's all about making distinctions without making divisions that would have these kind of abstract definitions to them. And so perception, at least the way Barfield puts it, and I think Steiner as well in the Philosophy of Freedom and elsewhere, is the receptive end of the polarity in our experience.
And it seems like all of the senses, the 5 senses that are usually recognized as the sources of perception, are somewhat more active in the sense that they're, well, not active, but the product of a certain kind of intentionality, I guess, that has become more habitual and somewhat specialized and fixed. So and this is what makes humans unique, is our sense organs are somewhat less overdeveloped or fit into a niche in comparison to other animals.
They're less finished.
Right.
They're still open. And this is interesting to consider, just with recent changes in the conception of the brain and neuroplasticity and all kinds of different similar discoveries about our organism.
Right.
And like genetics, epigenetics. Yeah.
So Steiner will talk about in prior epochs of the evolution of consciousness that human beings did perceive more with their like bodily organs, and that part of the movement into our more intellectualized, dualistic,
The brain.
materialistic, is the shift we perceive only with our brains now. Not the heart, not the lungs, at least not consciously so.
Not consciously, yeah.
And there's some practices like, yogic breathing techniques or ways of engaging the energy systems of the body that you might think would allow us to recover some of that. But Steiner seems cautious, or he just expresses a lot of caution around that because it could
Be dangerous.
be dangerous in the sense that
It could be self-destructive.
yeah, we're not organized as a social body or just our current consciousness, as the relationship between our consciousness and our bodies is not organized so as to be able to like maintain stability. If you start exploring that sort of a shift, it's like inappropriate for our phase of development.
Well, we need like a process of formation or initiation in order to like comprehend and then like negotiate it. Because I would say that he understands himself as offering a path to that sort of reconnection, but one that's like safe. That maintains, in the sense of like maintaining the integrity of the I, and not being possessed by other aspects of our being.
So it seems like the path of anthroposophy or spiritual science is about utilizing the I, or awakening to the power of the I to think with and weave together percepts in a way that's not already fixed in an existing sense organ or even bodily organ, but that is new, that is our own, that is the creation of our own thinking and feeling and willing. Like, so in other words, cultivating new organs of perception,
Yeah.
which he gives names to. Imagination, inspiration, and intuition. And at the very end of this book we just finished reading, Interdisciplinary Astronomy.
Yeah. That question.
He was, there's a question from someone in the audience that he answers about, is everything you're proposing for how a science of the future might more adequately apprehend the true movements of the heavens, that would this require these higher organs of perception? And he's like, yeah, it would.
Yeah.
And that sets science, natural science as we would normally understand it, a task that, it's not used to, because it's used to creating its own instruments to extend its capacity to perceive. But modern science often...
According to certain assumptions.
Yeah, well, it creates external technological, electronic instruments to extend our sensory capacity, but to extend a physical form of sensory
Yeah,
perception.
a certain assumption about what can be perceived.
Yeah. And
so there could be technologies that are external to us that have built in a wider possibility of perception.
Right.
Anyway, as you were saying.
Well, I just wonder to what extent there's a quality of light that we can partake in with our thinking that can't actually be measured by any instrument that we might invent, telescope, microscope, particle collider, whatever, that we wouldn't actually, that external form of technological extension is blind to the light that of our own thinking that's going into shaping those instruments in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
There's like a lack of, because often, you know, all these instruments that the physical sciences create to measure energy, to measure light, whatever, the theories they come up with always totally leave out the activity of thinking. There's no place for thinking activity in that universe that's described by physics.
Yeah.
Even though the instruments they're using to get all of the data that they're theorizing about and the theorization itself totally depends on that thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, again, the quality of the light itself. Like,
how would you say more about that?
yeah, well, like light as nature's first form of perception, and our thinking as the reflection upon that, and the not just reflection but participation in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I just read this essay by Barfield called "The Light of the World." It's beautiful, and maybe I've read it before. I don't know, but I wouldn't have understood nearly as much because I didn't know much about Steiner and anthroposophy. But he talks about like that before there was the outer light, there was the inner light. And that's sort of like depicted in Steiner's morphology of like planetary metamorphosis. That like, like light came about, but first there were beings. And the light is an expression of the being's activity. Like, so an inwardness, like spirit. And that our language, that like the Adamic language of like original or even more primordial than that participation where the world is speaking is like the word and light converge. I was just thinking of that when you said that light was the first form of perception and revelation, right? Revelation.
Yeah.
And that's what has been given through perception, and that's where our language comes from. It's what is our capacity to participate in the inwardness and make distinctions.
But what's the relationship between sound and light? Because I mean, in John's Gospel, it said the beginning is the Word, which is a sound, not light. But Barfield's linking light and sound in some way.
Light and meaning.
Logos.
Yeah, light and meaning.
I guess light
Thinking.
is vibratory as well.
I mean, I think light, thinking, meaning.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's all one.
Right.
But like, just like, you can hear somebody speak a word in another language, and there's like a vibration happening and everything. But if you don't have the meaning, like you just hear sound.
Right.
And so it's kind of like, without light, you don't have the self-revelation of whatever it is. I mean, I guess you do with sound, but you can't, light allows us, because it shines on this image that has distinctions latent in it, it allows us to start making distinctions and to come to understand rather than to just experience, like to just be kind of caught up in the welter of experience, but to then have like a relationship through the light and the distinction that it affords.
Yeah.
It's interesting also to think about, like, in interdisciplinary astronomy, beyond the earth, we're observing light and the behavior of lights, different lights.
Right. And the light is also just a sign or indication of a much more kind of encompassing power or effect, because the luminous bodies that we see are only a fragment of the whole sphere.
Yeah, the sphere of activity.
And so that sphere is what's left unseen, but maybe not unheard, or obviously it's felt, even if we don't see it, see the cause of the effect. For the example, the effect that the moon has and the sun has on our physiology. It's not something we see with our eyes. It's what makes our eyes.
Yeah, it's what. Yeah, there's this verse that I've been working with, and the last 3 lines are, "I hear in the speech of the gods. The speech of the gods is creation for me. The speech of the gods engenders me, creates me."
So we can hear the unseen.
Oh, yeah. It was Angus shared that esoteric lesson that I discovered that verse in it. And I think he shared it during one of our, at least one, I think multiple of our meetings.
So this is the music of the spheres. And if we can hear that music, it does give us a sense of like there's a predictability to the music, even if it's not totally repetitive. It's got a rhythm, and so we can kind of feel where it's going.
Yeah. It's like a life that we can entrain ourselves with.
Yeah. We can't calculate exactly how it will unfold, because, I mean, if we could, that wouldn't be very entertaining, or that wouldn't be very beautiful music. It would just be kind of too mechanical, right?
Yeah.
So these rhythms shape our bones.
Yeah.
And Steiner says the relationship between the long bones of our limbs and the spherical skull is an inversion.
Yeah.
A metamorphic inversion, a turning inside out. And that polarity is analogous to, which I don't mean to say just a metaphor there, it's corresponds to, would be better, the polarity between the earth and the sun.
And the movement of the superior planets and the movement of the inferior planets, Venus, Mercury, and then the first group, Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars. With Mercury and Venus like reinforcing the sun, and the others, Steiner says, connected with the fixed stars. And so then I wonder, like, the Earth, like, in that, like, is that also of the Earth? Like, I don't know. That was something I wondered.
Yeah, I mean, you have to begin to think in terms of synthetic geometry or projective geometry, where there are no separate parts, like all lines meet at infinity, and so...
Well, and like, right, also there's not 2 points on a line, it's 1 point.
So to imagine the sun as the earth turned inside out, and the earth as the sun turned inside out, and to imagine the human being as, like, the essence, the archetype of the human is not what we see. It's the earth form that underlies the metamorphic patterns. I mean, the threefold human, in some way, there's one underlying form that gives shape to our head, gives shape to our chest, our ribs, and gives shape to our limbs. These three parts, right? The nerves and senses, the rhythmic system, heart and lungs, and the metabolism and limbs are metamorphoses of the same underlying form. Just like the vertebrae are, the skull is a metamorphosed vertebrate bone.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can't see in 3 dimensions what the human form is really. In order to intuit that form, you have to throw your thinking into movement and see the lemniscatory flow that leaves what we see with our eyes in its wake. It's like...
Yeah, you have to be capable of imagination. And I think it's sort of... I think it's more common for people to perceive that way and think that way than maybe we realize. And I think that's partially like in the culture, like in the cultural representations in media. Like, just as an example, like, I feel like it was very strong in the 90s media because there was the books and the movies called Animorphs.
Mm-hmm.
And it depicted humans morphing into animals, and it did it in a way that sort of, once you see it, then you can start to imagine that kind of metamorphosis. But also with something like Pokemon, there's the Pokemon evolve and they maintain a motif, but there is a kind of like morphological transformation that they undergo that you observe. And I think these are just 2 examples in the cultural representations of the awareness of imaginative perception. But it's not necessarily carried into like an active, it's typically not activated, but it's there. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it might reflect real imaginal forms, but presented in a way and culturally coded in a way that it's just fantasy.
Yeah, fancy. Yeah, in Coleridge's sense.
Mm-hmm.
But still, fancy though can lead, if it's used well, can lead to true imagination.
It can, but like I know Coleridge says that, but I think about the effect of screens. Or like animation, or the externalization of imagination in this technological form. Doesn't it does it for us in a way? You know?
Well, but
so we're not cultivating
animators first had to be able to do it in their own minds.
Well, the artist does, yeah.
Yeah, but that's sort of now being taken away.
Not the audience.
And taken up by the computer, by AI.
Right. Because there's a difference between being entertained and being creative.
Creative, exactly, yeah. Anyway.
But the shift to actually doing real anatomy using an organ of perception that we might call imagination, or etheric imagination, let's call it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like looking at our actual bone structure and perceiving not the fixed form, but the fluid movement that takes like the lemniscate of the rib cage and the vertebral tube, the bones, and sees the lemniscate pattern in that, and then sees the limbs as open lemniscates, as like the way that pattern moves down the body. And when you move up from the rib cage and the spine into the skull, it's a closed lemniscate. And to just imagine that process unfolding embryologically, and to recognize that that's embedded in the movement of these planetary spheres which are also lemniscatory. Like it's a fluid form of perception that is really, I think, fleeting, like, because it's not as tangible as what we might want in terms of like something we could draw or something we could hold in our hands. And so it's easier to dismiss as unreal, as just fantasy. But Steiner's whole point that he started with around what a percept is, it's like we have to take responsibility for the power that we have to shape new percepts.
Well, new, but also maybe like in the sense that they're individualized,
Mm-hmm.
but also, there's something like, how should I put it? I think that like the truth of the human form that you were just describing, it's already part of our perception. We're just unconscious of it. Mm-hmm. And so, because otherwise, like you think of the human skeleton and there's no necessity in the human form. It's all just this kind of random conglomeration. But I don't think we really... I mean, that's not how the body acts anyway, but...
Well, we'd say it's natural selection, but it's just sort of what worked and was accumulated over the course of evolution by the selection of a harsh environment, and, the weak died and the mutations that failed didn't work, and this is what's left after that selection process, just totally driven by death, basically. Death as the great selector.
Yeah, whereas what you're describing, in the philosophy of freedom, Steiner talks about, like, in order to, like, know the world, the percepts have to be contemplated in their appropriate context. And, so, yeah, it's like we're just unconscious of the conceptual connections that bind everything, or the spirit, and
well, yeah,
and so it's in participating in the creative activity of the world that we start to perceive it, like, wakefully, and participate in the living process.
Mm-hmm. We take up our role among the hierarchies.
Hell yeah.